February 21, I'm Svetlana Chaparenko, Media Center of Ukraine Forum starts to work. We will have the presentation of the analytics from the Media Initiative for Human Rights, which has a title and the mission to say what is happening in Russian captivity and how to avoid the death of our military in Russian captivity as a result of beating and torture. We will also get to know about the suicides of our POWs because of the violence applied to them. So here we have Tetiana Katrychenko, she's Executive Director of the Media Initiative, Maria Klymyk, she's a journalist, Anastasiia Hondiul, she's a wife of a military from Azov brigade who was heavily wounded in Olenivka. Bohdan Slobodian, who is a witness to the death of a Ukrainian military person in Russian captivity, and Andrii Yakovlev, who is a lawyer. Could you please tell us what was the aim of the research and what have you got to know from the testimony of Ukrainian military personnel? Well, the aim was, the goal was to show that when you are in Russian captivity and you are accounted for by the Red Cross, there's still no guarantee that you will come out of the captivity alive and healthy. Our media initiative has always asked our POWs about what they saw when they were in detention centers, and one of the questions was whether they were visited by representatives of any international organizations and whether they have witnessed the deaths of military POWs. The answer to the first question was always negative. Russia does not allow Red Cross representatives to where they keep Ukrainian POWs, so there's no control over what's happening to our POWs there. As far as whether they were witnesses to the death of Ukrainian POWs, mostly they answered yes. They have either seen it with their own eyes or heard from the guys who were in neighboring cells, or probably during the exchanges of POWs. There are several events. First, when they are just being taken prisoner, often they have some wounds inflicted during the battle, so they are wounded when they are taken prisoners. So as witnesses, some witnesses said, the Russians did not want to treat them medically, so they just shot them summarily in situ, or they had too many POWs and they were selecting only those who could tell them something, and they kept those who could tell them something useful to them and they kept alive. However, all the rest were, as they say, brought to zero. Then the process of accepting the POWs when they are being taken to other places, they are being beaten by the guards. They do not take into account the age or this gender of this POW, whether they are ill or healthy. And we have testimony that during this process, several POWs died because the guards were, beating them indiscriminately, and the beating was too heavy for their state of health because they probably were wounded. Then the conditions in which they are kept do not help in any way to heal the wounds, and even healthy people during the captivity have their health diminishing because they are not being fed properly, they are being beaten, and very often people's hearts stop because they every day apply electric shocker to them. And we have testimony to the fact that they were torturing people with electric shocker until it ran out of charge. So people who had heart problems before this, they would not survive. Their heart would just stop. The medical help that should be provided during the captivity without any questions, for most POWs, they couldn't even ask for this because asking for medical treatment would end in beating, inflicted not only by guards but sometimes by medics. So because of constant beating, their wounds would not heal. There was not enough medical help or no medical help at all, and this led to death as well. We have testimony that people, well, just the bodies of people are being returned from the captivity, while their relatives would believe that people were healthy because, they have some letters, they have corroboration, confirmation from the Red Cross that people are in captivity, and the Red Cross would say that their health is satisfactory, but then one day the family would get a phone call and they hear that the body of the person whom you were waiting for are in the morgue, so go there and get it. And besides, Russia is returning bodies in such bad conditions that it's very hard to apply forensics to them. And Russians do not issue any documents about the state of people while they were alive in captivity. The maximum that they give is the certificate of death, which would only state the date and the place where the person had died. And they do not keep the bodies in proper conditions, so when they are being returned to Ukraine, they are in very, very bad condition, and it's very hard to understand what was the real reason for their death. So the goal of this analytics is to show that it's very important that there should be some external organizations that could control this process about what's happening to POWs in captivity. Recently, there was an exchange of bodies, and we had testimony from about a person who was very badly treated in one of the detention centers. He wasn't allowed to sleep, he was abused, and recently we had the body exchange, and this person, well, only his body was returned. So we receive this testimony about their state of health, about very bad treatment of POWs, and then as a result we have the return of these people, well, actually of their bodies. And my colleagues will tell you something in addition. Thank you, Maria. Of course, there are real stories of real people behind this report, and we are very grateful to Anastasiia and Bohdan that you came here to share your stories. Bohdan, we are happy that you are with us in Ukraine. You were in Russian captivity, and you witnessed the death of a Ukrainian military person there. Yes. They say that captivity kills, and I may say that I saw, or rather heard, how a healthy person, you know, he was restrained. He challenged actually the guards, but in this way he was able to prolong his life. Since we came to that detention center, he was put into a solitary confinement, and this is, you know, very dark and very damp, and the person there just goes mad. When a person is thrown there, they're breaking this person until they agree to cooperate with them, and they bring people to the end. One of such cases was when the guys, from the first days, and this was the end of May, he was thrown into solitary confinement. He wasn't allowed to sleep. This is the first step. We all were allowed to sleep, but our son was broken. We woke up twice per night. We were standing still for 2 hours every time, and he wasn't allowed to sleep at all. His record was 7 days. And after he was allowed to rest a bit, he was asked for how long you didn't have an opportunity to sleep, and he said 7 days. When they were working shifts and a new shift would come, they were rather surprised at how he was sustaining, and he was made to do some physical exercise, and he was beaten every day, 3 or 4 times a day. In the morning, when we had our morning roll call, people from 3 solitary confinement cells were taken to the corridor, beaten, and then put back into the confinement. Then we had a walk, and before our walk, they were again taken out of the confinement, and then they were laid on the ground and they were beaten. They hid their kidneys and other vital bodies, and at around 10 o'clock, when we were taking a walk, or rather we were running to have a walk, we had to go there bent with our hands behind our backs. They loved to stand in some hidden places. They had polyethylene buttons, and they were beating us. It doesn't break the bones, you know, but it does hit you so that you have a trace of this, and the skin may be broken, and then it becomes rotten. So we were running to have our walk, and everyone could get hit twice or 3 times. Then when we were close to the walking ground, we were again laid on the ground and again beaten, and then we had a walk for half an hour. We were singing then, but then we had to go back, and again we were beaten. And of course it was especially cruel to the people who were in solitary confinement. They were made to do some physical exercise, and when people became exhausted, they were beaten again. So this lasted for 2 or 3 months, and he was beaten up all the time. I remember that on Wednesdays, on Wednesday we had some soup and pasta, and he asked for another spoon of pasta. Of course, he wasn't given additional food, but then they took him out of the soldier confinement and have beaten him again. So when he was made to sign the documents that he allegedly killed a person and cut the cross, the German cross on his body, they made him sign this document, and after this, when he was half dead, he was brought to our cell, and I haven't heard him while he was in this common cell, but I know that he was taken again to this walking ground, or rather he was carried there. He soiled himself already, he didn't control himself, and this happened all before the 31st of December. However, on the New Year's Eve, and it was late at night, my cell was next to soldier confinement. Tells there was a bathroom next to my cell, and then the guards' room. From there they watched us. I heard that something was dragged along the corridor, and this was his body. He wasn't breathing, he wasn't crying, and he was given artificial breathing. I heard some talk about kidneys because his kidneys were not working at that moment. And it was almost the New Year, and the ambulance came, and he was taken away from the cell, and we heard nothing from him anymore, and his fate is unknown. But I think that even then, when I heard his moans, I understood that he couldn't live any longer, because if your kidneys do not work, knowing the level of medicine there, knowing the fact that, before him, I had another POW, or actually he was a civilian. He was something like 70 years of age. He was from Izum, according to him. He was beaten just as we were. He had to squat for 2,000 times like we, and he had a stroke one night, and he was just lying there and looking at us, and one of the guards asked what he is lying, and we said that he probably has a stroke because he doesn't react. They came into the cell, looked at him, and said that the nurse will come in the morning. And in the morning, when everyone has risen, we have woken him up. He wasn't able to move. We made him sit. He wasn't eating anymore, and he couldn't even open his mouth. We had to open his mouth to give him some food. So we didn't know what to do. Then the guards there was a shift change, and the nurse came. She gave him some injection, and in half an hour we were taken to the walking ground, and he was taken away by the ambulance. So I had an experience of seeing how people feel in such cases, and this was the second case with this guy, that he was being murdered for the duration of those 2 months. I don't know what happened to him in the cell, in the common cell, but they say that they were beating him in the cell as well. But these 2 months of solitary confinement, when I heard him, he was just being killed. Thank you, Bohdan. Anastasia, you are the wife of a military person who was in Olenivka. He was heavily wounded. Could you please share your story? I am Anastasiia Hondiul. I am a representative of the NGO, the community of Olenivka Families. I am the wife of the Ukrainian defender who is in enemy's captivity for 22 months. He was first wounded in Mariupol. He was operated. The surgery was performed in Azovstal, and the fragment of the shell is still in his body. His second wound he got in July 2022 in Olenivka. I don't know what was the wound then. However, he is badly wounded, and he is on the list that the Russians have published. He was taken together with other badly wounded people to a Donetsk hospital. According to the UNHCR report, those who survived the terrorist act had numerous burns and wounds, and the guards did not provide any help. So those who survived tried to do this on their own, and only after several hours of the explosion, these victims were taken to a hospital in Donetsk. They were taken there along the bad roads, and they suffered additional. Several badly wounded people died while they were taken to the hospital, and those who got light wounds were put into solitary confinement for 1 month, and there they were actually isolated from other POWs. There were many wounded, over 130 of them. The medics who were providing first aid started to divert them according to the severity of wounds. Something like 50 people were taken away from the colony. However, some of them were returned to the colony, to the camp already in September. Some were in the hospital even in December. Our relatives, our near and dear, were leaving Azov in a bad condition. Then they had Olenivka, then they had terrorist act, and the Russians do not allow to contact them. I saw my husband on a Telegram channel, and there was a video from Channel 24. I saw my husband in a hospital in Donetsk. He said then that he loves me and that he is awaiting the exchange. 45 kilos is how much he weighed. Then I saw a certificate. I also saw a fragment from the video from the hospital, how our people were taken from the hospital and taken back to Olenivka. Since then, I don't know anything about my husband, and the only thing I know that the Russians have confirmed that he is in their captivity. At the moment, 59 Ukrainian defenders who are badly wounded are in Russian prisons. where the Russians do not observe the conditions of Geneva Conventions and do not provide proper medical help. They apply moral and physical torture to those people. These people were able to survive Inferno, but they are still under danger, so we call for their quickest return to home. The captivity has not become the guarantee of life. And Olenivka and this experience testify to this. Andrii, we have heard several poignant stories, and of course we want to punish those who perpetrated these crimes. How can we bring to responsibility those who kill our prisoners, and what the world and Ukraine can do in this respect? First of all, you have to say that the Russian authorities do not consider our POWs as POWs. They do not recognize Geneva Conventions, and their legal status is not defined. Same applies to civilians who are put into the same cells as our military. They are keeping them together in a special custody. We see that this leads to the fact that our POWs do not have any protection, even from the Russian legislation, which is usually applies to Russian prisoners. Russian prisoners have some rights. Our POWs do not have any rights, and that's why the guards can treat them in the way they want to behave. And we do not know whether they are being ordered to do this or that's their own initiative. I'm just talking about how you explain to a person who is not in the context of our war that this is the violation of laws and customs of war. And some of our prisoners die. These are numerous and systemic cases, and this means that either someone orders to behave and to treat our prisoners this way, or they do not control the situation. So we have to have in mind commanders, and while we understand that our POWs in different territorial divisions of Russia, this means that those are commanders and officials of a rather high level, and we have to press upon them the need to change the treatment of our POWs, because this leads to their deaths. As far as the international humanitarian law is concerned, these are war crimes, because cruel behavior, cruel treatment of POWs violates Geneva Conventions, and these are war crimes. When we will be able to say and prove that this is systemic violation, then we say that we'll be able to say that these are not just war crimes, but crimes against humanity. And that's why we have to bring to responsibility some high officials. And of course, we have to provide effective investigation both in Ukraine and abroad, and the potential sentences that may be applied to top officials of Russia have to be provided for by the system of implementation. So we have to work even now to the effect that these sentences are being implemented. However, there are difficulties with executing the sentence from one country in another. Sentencing does not necessarily mean punishment, and the justice is meted out when a specific person is being brought to responsibility and being punished. And only then we can expect prevention. And we know that in different prisons and in different camps, there are different ways to treat our POWs. And this means that this influence on officials can be influential, and this can improve life for some prisoners. So we have to influence the top officials in order to improve the situation. Is it possible at all, and how this can be done? Thank you everyone for coming and for being interested in this topic. I'll hark back to the beginning. First, our organization, the Media Initiative for Human Rights, is systematically researching the issue of Ukrainian military in captivity. We started to do this not on the 24th of 2022. We did this even before. And this analytics with 10 pages of it today is the result of our work, which lasted for several years. We talked to the military and civilians who were in captivity on the territory controlled by the Russian Federation or in the Russian Federation proper. I would like to remember cases that the Russian Federation did not start to torture Ukrainian military in captivity after the 24th of February. They were doing this before. In May of 2019, 8 Ukrainian military were taken captive in Luhansk region, and 2 of them are still in captivity, and 1 of those 8 was brought home in a black bag. He was killed in the Makiyivka camp number 32 under unclarified circumstances. We knew that this happened, and his body was given back to Ukraine without any internal organs. It was there that Russians were already killing Ukrainian POWs and tried to cover the results and reasons of their work, because you could determine the cause of death by his internal organs. We wanted to call this research death in imprisonment. However, we think that the title Mission to Save is better. Although there are several categories of cases when Ukrainian POWs are dying in Russian custody, and yes, this is as soon as they are taken prisoners, they have no weapons, they are controlled by the Russian armed forces. We heard about the case next to Avdiivka, when at least 5 wounded military personnel were found dead, and it is evident that the Russian Federation has killed them, but we can say that those people were in captivity and custody of the Russians. Second, when people find themselves in detention centers on the territory of Russia, and those sites do not provide any access to anyone, first of all, to the international humanitarian organizations and the Red Cross representatives, because we know that the Red Cross reports on their publicly reports, and not necessarily publicly reports about their visits to to such places. And such visits do not allow to stop the systemic torture of Ukrainian military, which results in deaths in captivity. Some international organizations, the international community, are, I think, avoiding such control on purpose. And the result of this avoidance, are the cases of deaths in captivity. If we are talking about Olenivka barracks, it's called 200 barrack 200 because first 200 prisoners were put there, and 200 is of course the code for a dead person, and the mass killing of POWs happened there, and the Russian Federation was at first not allowing the Red Cross to come there, and then they didn't allow them to go to the place of the explosion, and they do not allow to visit dozens of places where people are kept in custody on the territory of Russia. My colleagues have already told about specific cases. I won't repeat them, but I'll tell you that we applied every effort, and on page 9 you see recommendations to the state of Ukraine, to the International Red Cross Committee and other states and international community, how, according to us and to our experts, we can try to change the situation. As for the state of Ukraine, it of course has to adhere to its obligations on the documenting of all the cases when we get to know from talking to former POWs or from other sources the cases of systemic torture and the cases of deaths in captivity. We also have to unify the way that those investigations are being conducted, make it similar. We understand that the Ukrainian state needs, and there are different people who are responsible for the exchange process, and they all have to be in constant communication with the relatives of our prisoners. On the one hand, they know something that official bodies do not know. On the other hand, they need our constant support. We paid specific attention to the International Red Cross because we have grounds to believe that this organization should monitor those places where our POWs are kept. So first of all, they have to monitor the information and to establish the biggest possible number of places of imprisonment, and they should strive at having consultation meetings with Ukrainian POWs in order to understand the situation in those places of custody. You know, when the Red Cross comes to a detention center and they're being showed certain cells and certain people, well, this does not work. In this way, you cannot gain the information that will be able to avert this torture. So you should aim at having access to those places. We have to document the cases when Ukrainian military got wounded or were taken prisoners with wounds, or they got those wounds while being imprisoned. You can get this from talking to former POWs. They, as a rule, they are eager to talk. They are interested in telling this to Ukrainian law enforcers or international organizations, including Red Cross, so you can get this information and then verify it having certain resource on the territory of the Russian Federation. And if the Red Cross gets to know, and we, as the media initiative, have written to the Red Cross with a list of badly wounded prisoners of war who have got those wounds either before they were taken captive or later, and some of them have their legs or hands amputated. And we have such people, we know for sure. And this kind of trauma allows them to hope that they can be passed over to third countries or back home, not as a result of exchange, because these military people cannot take part in combat anymore. And of course, the Red Cross, according to our opinion, has to try to clarify the reasons why some of the military and civilians have died in detention centers in Russia. And of course, we know some people who were confirmed by the International Red Cross. We know that when a person is taken prisoner, they can hope that a representative from the Red Cross comes to them and then passes information on to the Ukrainian side and relatives. And the last thing, that our research would have been incomplete without our cooperation with the International Commission for Missing Persons. We asked them about how to do forensics on the bodies of those Ukrainian POWs who were returned to Ukraine in order to establish the cause of death, and in the future, so that the Russian Federation would be held responsible for such cases. There should be forensic tests applied to all this. We're talking about this all the time, and of course, we have to say that the Russian Federation is covering the real causes of deaths in captivity, because, yes, we understand that some people may die as a result of wounds they got on the battlefield. Some can die as a result of, for instance, tuberculosis in the places of custody, although, of course, the Russian Federation should fight this as well. And they are covering these beatings, this torture. For the Ukrainian side, it is very important to investigate every such case and to evaluate all those cases specifically and all together, because these are going to be documents during international processes. We understand that there's a war on the territory of Ukraine. To take military prisoners is not a crime, and the warring parties have the right to do this, but the crime is to beat and torture POWs. We have to talk about this. Thank you for coming and paying attention to this topic. I would like also to draw your attention that we do not talk about punishment, but about decreasing the amount of suffering of our POWs. It is very important to document the fact of being a prisoner. There's a special card according to Geneva procedure, and it is being sent to relatives, and then they can contact the person. And this is being done on the part of Ukraine, but it is not being done on the part of Russia. This means that we do not know the exact figure for exact number of prisoners. And if the person is not documented and there's a constant torture, then some people do not survive. But if we don't know that they are in captivity, and some of them may be deemed missing, and the fact of confirming that they are prisoners of war is capable of decreasing the suffering of POWs. And of course, this can be done by the Red Cross or the substitutes NGOs according to the Geneva Convention. And this will also be able to decrease the scope of improper conduct. And prisoners will be capable of talking to their relatives. So talking to outside world can decrease the suffering. And of course the lawyers are needed in order to confirm that those people are alive. So this possibility, this opportunity is there. We have to think about how to visit and how to communicate with our people there. And again, we don't know how many people were taken prisoner next to Avdiivka, but we have to think even now that these circumstances should be examined, and we can ask the Red Cross to examine the facts, because even now we can decrease their suffering, or we will not know about them, and then different bad stories will happen to them. And how to make more probable the return from the captivity. The lawful aim of keeping people POWs is to keep them there until the end of combat actions, so they do not become combatants again. If we can guarantee that those POWs who come back would not be sent to combat again, this will be the next argument for us, because there won't be any reason to keep them in captivity anymore. My question goes to Bohdan. Could you please tell us how long you've been in captivity? I understand that you've been exchanged, and where were you? I was taken prisoner on the 20th of March 2022 in Kherson Oblast. I was exchanged on the 8th of January 2023. This was the first exchange in 2023, and the representatives of the security service and Red Cross were telling us that we were the first prisoners who were released in 2023, and every day I was counting days, and by the end of imprisonment I had 286 days in captivity. My question is to Andrii. Is it possible to composed the register of torturers who are abusing Ukrainian prisoners of war. As far as I know, the Office of Prosecutor General is working on this. They treat this seriously, and I hope that soon we will hear about this. Maybe at some stage when there's enough proof and evidence, it is a good idea to talk about them, to influence them, and of course, the investigators can share the information about these persons so that they know that they are being watched, and this will make them decrease the torture that they inflict. If the Russians do not recognize Ukrainian military POWs, so what's their status? No one knows what their status is. All the human rights activists do not know this, including the Russian ones. But this does not mean that there's no status at all. It may be secret. There may be some instruction which is there, because we know that the POW is being taken prisoner in Ukraine, then he is being transported to different places in Russia, and they are being kept in some places, and in those camps and prisons where they do not have Russian prisoners anymore. So there is a system. And of course, there are some instructions about food and other conditions. And it is not important that Russia does not recognize Geneva Conventions, because the Geneva Conventions are being applied anyway. And when they start criminal proceedings, this makes a person visible, and even judges become a bit afraid, because now the proceedings will have their surnames, and when the investigation starts, there are several opportunities to influence. In Russia, our status was detained. We were not accused or defendants. We were just detained, and they accused us of hindering their special operation, and this applied to a rank-and-file soldier. We were not accused. Those who were made to to sign some documents were in the status of accused, and of course, you know, those KGB people, they're very cruel, and most of our POWs were just detained. Now please pay attention that they are being considered detained, but there are no documents about this. And then they become suspects or accused. So they are preparing new cases in order to demonstrate that Ukrainian military have violated Geneva Conventions. They are doing this on purpose, and this is very important to tell what Bohdan has told us, so that we see the conditions under which this process unfolds, and they forcibly make our people to confess, and however we assess their courts, we see that as a result of solitary confinement or torture, people do go there. My question to Andrii, as far as I understood from your word, we have to tell Russia that the POWs who come back would not take part in combat again, and this is going to decrease the tortures applied to Ukrainian POWs, and this is linked to Azov commanders. There are different options when people are given to the third countries. However, there are always some conditions that we don't know, but if we are talking about what you said, we know for sure that there are inhuman conditions, cruel conditions for our POWs. Some of them do not survive, and we do not even know how many people are in Russian captivity. Why do they do this? Because they keep our people prisoner, and from the point of view of the civilized world, it is lawful because a person is being taken away from the military and they keep them in captivity until the combat finishes. If we have clear-cut argument that our military who come back from POWs, from imprisonment would not go back to combat, then the lawful goal of them keeping in captivity goes away. I think that this argument is possible and it may be advocated. Any other questions? Partnership Fund Strong Ukraine. I'm an advisor on missing persons. Thank you for your work, which is mostly invisible, and we were talking about documenting and bringing to responsibility. I have been studying this prison camp subculture, and I know that the Russian camps are using the work of prisoners in relation to other prisoners. Do they do this to our POWs? Because this is going to complicate the situation. Our regime was, to they wanted to weaken us as much as possible. If there were some work, we would work, because we were just standing for 17 hours a day. We were not allowed to move. We had to look down, and our sleep was constantly broken. We were just dreaming about having a opportunity to work. And of course, we had to clean our cells 3 times a day. And this was the only gymnastics and movement that we could do during this captivity. This was the only thing when we had to work. However, when there was already snow during winter, some people were made to clean snow from when I was talking about the work, this was in inverted commas. It's about torture. Oh no. This torturing was done by the guards. We haven't seen anyone else. Of course, there were some assault troops who were guarding us. And yes, I think that assault troops could put on the guards' uniform, or for instance, their lawyers or their intelligence persons could put on the guards' uniform and try to beat out confession from us, because they were trying to catch us, because person could say something during the interrogation, but then they would say something else in the corridor or during the working hours, working minutes, and then they were trying to catch our people on this. Yes, we can say that in reality they were putting on the guard's uniform, and by the way, they were in masks. But please pay attention that they just do not keep people in captivity being extracted from the military, but they are subjected to an inhuman treatment in order for them to confess in alleged crimes. And that's about people keeping not just detained. Why this is done? Because they do not want us to come back to the front. We were told right away that we will take a DNA test from you and also scan your face, because, for instance, if you are liberated, you go free, and you become our prisoner again, or you'll be executed in situ. So I think that you will be either given a life sentence or they will torture you for 15 years. But pay attention that the person who does this as a system, they're responsible for this, and this is highly regulated system, and this is the proof that we can bring those people to responsibility for creating such a system. Igor Bondarenko, 1+1, were you able to establish the number of Ukrainian prisoners who died in Russian captivity, both official or unofficial numbers? And you also, in the title of your research, say how to avoid the death of Ukrainian prisoners in Ukraine, Russian captivity. But I think that there's no answer to this, because Russians are unpredictable. Maybe not even psychiatrists can do anything in this. So how many and how to avoid the death, to prevent death? We made an official application to ask how many Ukrainian POWs were returned as the result of exchange. So 49 bodies of Ukrainian military who were considered that they were imprisoned were given back to Ukraine, not counting those who died on the combat line when they were taken prisoners, and not counting those who died in Olenivka. As far as prevention goes, my speech was about this. The Russian Federation behaves with the Ukrainian prisoners so because they think that they won't be held responsible for this, and they are doing this because they have an opportunity not to allow external control for how they are being told. Compare this to Ukrainian story, when we see or at least know how we keep Russian military and Ukrainian prisoners of war. When we talk to Ukrainian POWs who came back from captivity, they see the Russians who have been given to that side, and they pay attention to how the Russians look. Like, for instance, they do not lose weight. And when we talk to our POWs, former POWs, about what could prevent their deaths, they would say control, because otherwise all those guards will behave as they want. And of course, they are using unbelievable cruelty. When you're listening to our military, you just do not understand how this torture could be invented, not to mention applied. So we lack control, and that's what we have to demand from international organizations, and we have to ask our international partners about control. We do not ask to free everyone. We understand that that's impossible, but we want as few Ukrainian POWs suffer and die as possible. Marina Kulinich, Maple, we're talking about international bodies, including the Red Cross. I want to ask about Ukrainian law enforcers. How efficient is their work in investigating those cases of torturing Ukrainian POWs and their deaths? We invited representatives from the Prosecutor General's office here, and I hope that they are watching us. We know that the office is systematically working on investigations about the places where the Russians hold Ukrainian prisoners and what is happening there. We're not talking about, for instance, the security service and the General Prosecutor's Office, but we as an NGO try to add something and to provide additional capacities to our law enforcers. Thank you. Thank you. We had the presentation of the analytics about what's happening in the Russian containment centers and how to prevent the deaths of Ukrainian POWs. Stay with us. We will again be talking about important things.